Hey, everybody. Uh, Welcome to our first show with Jim Goodall. We're going to be doing this quite a bit, I hope. This will be our first one. We're going to go ahead and start with our bumper, and we'll see how that goes. Welcome to Not Aliens, Discovering Our Lost History. There's a new, vast renaissance of knowledge destroying our antiquated theories of human history. Advanced ancient ruins in plain sight. Polygonal 20, 50, 100, 1,000, 3,000 ton advanced engineered building blocks with similar keystone connections across Earth. Mysterious, ancient, engineered soils all over the Earth. An advanced ancient human civilization was on our planet and fell. Join us as we dig deep and uncover the truth that our history is a search and rescue, not a search and recovery. Well, thanks for joining us. That's our first intro to our first show, which will hopefully be a consistent thing. It's going to be my pleasure to introduce Jim Goodall, good friend of mine, and just spent some time together in his home turf in Tucson, Arizona. We are working on a cool project together. We have a lot to talk to you about. It's so nice for all of you to join us. And let's get Jim on right now. Hey,
Yeah.
How you doing?
I'm doing great. I've been a little bit nervous earlier today when I couldn't get anything to work on my Mac, but it always helps to turn the keyboard on. I don't even know why it was turned off, but It was turned off.
Yeah.
I mean, I was getting, oh my God, it's broken. What can I do?
Yeah, it's quite a thing. Where for everyone who's listening, when you're setting these things up, and Jim and I both do a lot of shows and we do a lot of interviews, and then, you think it's a standard day. And if I've learned anything, it's you have no idea what's going to go wrong on any particular day. And in this case, can I out you for what went wrong?
Yeah, I must, when I was cleaning the keyboard, I must have turned it off. And I'm trying to get the thing to link up, to at least to hook up, to go into StreamYard, and it won't do anything. It's just I keep getting error codes, and because I had the keyboard turned off, so it made no difference what I was doing. So,
well,
operator error,
as usual, right?
Right.
Well, Draco, Michigan UFO sightings. Welcome. Aaron's Energy. We got some people joining us right now. It's definitely great to actually be live with you. There's been a lot of requests for me to do more live shows, and I can't think of anyone better to do it with. So thanks for being on.
Well, I'm honored and delighted to be here, and we had a lot of fun last week. And
yeah, you know what? It is. Last week was great. Obviously, this is going to be recorded forever in perpetuity on YouTube. At the same time, we'll set this up for everyone listening for notaliens.com, and it'll be available there, of course. But for everyone, I mean, we definitely have people joining us. And, I was at America's Stonehenge, and I delayed starting the show by about 15 minutes, the live broadcast, because there were people who drove 7 hours, 6 hours, 3 hours, an hour and a half, 2 hours. There was the people who came live to America's Stonehenge. Some of them came late, and it's I always want to make time for everyone that's going to join us. But for those of you who are already listening, we're going to just have to tell some other people to join in and rewind at some point. So for those that don't know your general background, and because it's our first show, this is where I ask you to kind of give your general background.
Well, the thing behind me is what I'm an expert on, and that's the CIA version of the Lockheed Skunk Works Blackbird. And last week, Jared and I were wandering around an SR-71 and a D-21 at Pima Air and Space Museum, and that was fun. I'm a published author. My 29th book is at my publishers today. I specialize in military aircraft, naval ships, and submarines. Love things that go bump in the night. I am somewhat of an expert on Area 51. I'm a friend of Bob Lazar's and the late John Lear, among many crazy people I know in this community. And I just, if it flies, if it's in the water, if it's going under the water, if it goes into space, if it's a machine, then I'm interested in it. I'm also interested in ancient civilizations. I mean, I look at Machu Picchu. I look at what the pyramids, and the pyramids all over the planet, not just in Egypt, but South America, Central America, Southeast Asia. They're everywhere, and it just tells me we're not alone.
No, so and I think that for those that don't know, I mean, I think your recent lecture series that when people are interested, I think you have a brilliant presentation that you definitely go around the country and are willing to give. I love the title of it. You want to go over that one quick?
Everything you want to know about Area 51. Is that the one?
Yep.
Okay. Everything you want to know about Area 51. Didn't know who to ask and was afraid to get shot. And I made the presentation up in Phoenix here. The last one I did was about 2 months ago. Very well received. I was surprised at the number of people there. We had 140, 160 people, which is pretty good for a beautiful Saturday. But almost every weekend's beautiful. We don't have snow like you just got a dusting of in Minnesota. And I spent 27 years of my life in Minneapolis. And so I know almost exactly where you live, Jared. And I wasn't born there, but Minnesota's my home. My son, my daughter, 5 grandsons, a couple ex-wives, all live in the area. So I'm back there a lot. There a lot.
I mean, and we, it is really it is a really fun place as far as the variety between. I don't think until you leave the state you realize not everywhere has the Mississippi River, Lake Superior, Lake Mille Lacs, and 20,000 other plus lakes, and the uniqueness of Minnesota for vegetation and greenery. It's not common.
No, and it's not as wholesome as it once was. Because I was in Minneapolis during the event there on Lake Street in 2020.
Yeah,
and it's just it's a crying shame what they did to the city, and a lot of it hasn't been cleaned up, at least in that area. I was just my son has a big 3/4 ton pickup, all-wheel drive. Plus, he's heavily armed when we went down Lake Street. It was sad. It was really sad. Minneapolis has always been, there was at one time there was no place that you would go in Minneapolis and be fearful. I think that's changed a little bit. North Minneapolis can be challenging, but overall, it's just the air is clear. There never used to be any graffiti. I haven't spent much time looking for graffiti, but the freeways are clear of derelict cars, and not like you find in Ohio and in the Rust Belt. I remember the first time I went through the Cincinnati area on my way to Dayton, I was absolutely dumbfounded the number of abandoned cars on the side of the road and just trash everywhere. And and when you come from Minnesota, and people always refer to as Minnesota nice. Well, it's not as nice anymore as it once was, but it's still a place I call home.
Yeah, I think Minnesota nice to me never meant nice, though. Isn't it always been passive aggressive?
Okay.
I mean, wasn't that the true statement? It's like, you're never going to know that somebody doesn't like you. They're going to be really offended if you actually confront them on it. And you're expected to show up for things that people don't want you to show up for, but they don't want to actually address it with you. That's for anyone who's out of state. And then I've met so many people who have moved here and they're like, why does everyone already seem like they've had all their friends since 7th grade? They don't need new friends.
Yeah.
That's so a lot of people who do move state to state, they tend to find it difficult to make friends in Minnesota because they've already made all their frenemies. They're not going to make any new ones. You only get in through a relationship or out because of one. I don't know. There's some, so there's some amazing companies, beautiful scenery, great theater, entertainment world here, big comedy hub. I mean, there's a million things positive I would say about Minnesota. So I'm not telling anyone not to move here. Just saying.
No, but you're going to have to like that white stuff that falls from the sky.
Yes, and as Miss Danielle G, there's I wonder if it's Danielle. I don't know. The snow did fall this morning. To Jim's point, it is when I walked in the house tonight, 43 degrees and dropping.
Oh.
Yep. What's it in Arizona right now?
I think last time I looked, it was 91.
Oh, well,
yeah.
This interview's over. Thank you, everyone. Good night.
Yeah.
So the weather is slightly different. Normally, Minnesota is not this cold. Just for everyone who knows or doesn't, this is really not ski weather yet. Normally it stays warmer and then magically drops around October, Halloween, 31st, somewhere around there. It usually gets cold or can be cold, but we're expecting some warmer weather next week. So it is Minnesota. It is also psychotic. So for those of you who don't like consistent things and drama and weather, among other things, Minnesota is your perfect stop for tropical to completely frozen and Arctic.
Yeah. Now that thing behind me, it arrived from Palmdale inside a C5, actually 2 of them, on the 29th of October. We unloaded it. And then Halloween, I'm taking my daughter, who was 8, I think it was at the time, and we're just going down. We're going to go around the long block. And it started snowing after we hit about 4 houses. By the time we got back going around, we already had about a foot of snow on the ground. And then over the next 10 days, it snowed 61 inches of snow with strong wind. And we all fearful this is going to be the next ice age. And that was the 31st through about the 10th of November. And then it didn't snow again until March. Come March, there was brown grass and no snow on the ground, and then we had another big, snowfall. But you're used to that. You're from there, and I spent most of my adult life there. And when I left there, I went to Seattle, and then from there I went to Hawaii. And I spent 4 years in Hawaii as the curator at the Pacific Aviation Museum in Pearl Harbor. And that's where I'm heading Tuesday morning. I'm heading to Hawaii for 2 weeks. I can hardly, and next week's broadcast will be from the beach.
He's already rolled at him, everyone. Yes, Jim will be on a beach, and I will be not on a beach.
Yeah,
I will say that. But while you're in that museum, something I've never asked you, and I know we're not diving too far down any general direction. For those of you just joining us. Yeah, this is Jim and I's first co-hosting hangout / we'll be doing it more, but to kind of drill into the curation in Pearl Harbor, when you got that job, did you have any expectation about how long you were going to be there, and what was the coolest thing you were given to do or found or saw while you were working there?
Well, my first day on the job, Ken DeHoff was the executive director at the time. He gave me a project. I had 90 days to finish it. I said, what is the project? Well, we have to do a Korean War exhibit. Okay. We have an F-86 that is mostly corroded away. What are we going to do? So we just started going full blast, and we made it. I made it 91 days, and then I got my butt chewed for, well, you were over budget. I said, I didn't approve the budget. I didn't have anything to do with the budget. You gave it to me, and I started working. And it was just that was the very first thing. And I was working 12 hours a day to get the exhibit put together. We had interactive video, and it cost about twice as much as what they had budgeted. But it was a big hit, and we got it done on time. So I guess I was a hero in that respect. But it was just fun. I mean, everywhere you looked was history.
Oh,
We have the some of the glass panes in the hangar doors. They had the bluish glass with the steel wire mesh inside. There's bullet holes in them, and those bullet holes are from December 7th, 1941. And if you know where to look on the ramps, you can see where rounds were fired and ricocheted off. And and I'm a historian, and that's really where my heart is. And I at one time wanted to be a history teacher, but I knew I'd have students like me, and I'd end up in prison for murder or something. So I decided not to. But I still love history, and it was just fascinating. We had a Japanese Zero that had a crash landing or emergency landing on the island of Niihau, which is just off the coast of Kauai, the last of the bigger islands on the Hawaiian chain. And that island is privately owned. There's 85 people on the island, the Robinsons, and they donated the Zero to the museum when it opened up. And it's a crashed Hulk, but you can tell what it is, and we even have the tractor that you can for pulling the thing over to to where they were going to just store it over the last 50 years. Did the pilot
survive?
Yeah, the pilot survived. They made emergency landing, and it was a place that the Japanese figured that if you got shot up, you couldn't make it. You couldn't make it back to the carriers. Land on this island because there was some dry lake beds on it, and we'll bring it. We'll come and get you on a submarine. So with the Robinson, pardon?
Did they pick him up?
No. The locals ended up shooting the guy. He tried to get away, and they shot him. But one of the things the Robinson family did, and this is back in the 30s when they were worried about an invasion from Japan. Even back then, they actually dug trenches in the dry lake bed about 2 feet deep, about 3 feet wide, and in a crosshatch pattern. I think the lines are as you've looked on the checkerboard, you're about 4 feet by 4 feet or 8 feet by 8 feet, and in between is where they dug the furrows. And what that did that prevented the Japanese pilots from having a smooth place to land. When you come in, you don't really realize that there are trenches all over this dry lake bed that you think is going to be a nice smooth place. So the Zero was torn up pretty good as it tried to land on the dry lake bed.
They had already done it.
I guess old man Robinson felt that it was something that he wasn't told to do it, but it just made good sense. And he didn't like the Japanese anyway. So he said, if this will cause him some problems, I'll be more than happy to do it.
But they did that before Pearl Harbor.
Correct. And because there was something that was, Billy Mitchell was in the mix back in the 30s. He's the one who was talking about being able to bomb naval ships out of the water. And he proved it, and they tried to court-martial him for a lot of reasons. But when they were Islanders back in the 30s, they said this would if we could not command you to do it, but if we could encourage you to do it, it would be very, very beneficial in the long term. So the Robinson family decided that they were going to take it to heart, and they dug all the trenches. And the other thing that's funny about that island, there are 85 people live on the island, and they're all either have been working there forever. A couple of them have never been off the island, which I find weird, especially in today's world.
That is weird.
But if any of the family members get a tattoo, they're off the island.
What?
Yeah.
So
and there's no very wealthy landowners.
They just
at
hate
least
tattoos.
Yeah. I mean, I look at some of the people today with tats, and I rode Harleys for 50 years, and I don't have a tat anywhere on my body. I'm pure. Yeah.
Well, now for everyone who knows, I can confirm I have seen pictures. You actually ride a motorcycle to Sturgis. You don't park it into a cage or a trailer and take it in the back of a truck. You actually ride.
I went 3,400 and almost 3,500 miles on that trip. You will full leathers when you're riding, and there's places it was 100, 110, and you take the leathers off, you're just sopping wet. And the exciting thing was when I was coming back from Sturgis, this was August 13th of 2013, I had an 05 Road King Classic with a Screaming Eagle motor. And outside of Freona, Texas, doing 70 miles an hour, I hit standing water. And the bike started going like this. And the next thing I know, I mean, my thought was, oh, shit, I don't want to go this way. I wasn't worried about dying, but I was worried about having my wife to claim a pile of hamburger that once was her husband. And I left the bike. They said I hydroplaned for about a quarter of a mile. And when I stopped, about halfway there, I was conscious, and I'm just looking at the motorcycles right next to me as I'm skidding down the road. And then I don't remember stopping, but when I finally did, remember or was conscious, I think the mind automatically blocks out anything that's going to be really terrible. And I'm laying there, and I'm straddling both westbound lanes. This is US 60, US 70 going into Clovis, New Mexico. And I'm laying there, and I said, "Oh God, I hope my feet are where they're supposed to be." And I looked down; they were right where they were supposed to be. I wiggled my toes. I lifted one foot up, lift the other foot up. Not a problem. I lifted this arm up, fine, and went like this. I had blood everywhere. It's raining again. I lost this much skin right here. And that was it. And as I'm laying there, my next thought was, oh God, I hope there isn't a 18-wheeler with 80,000 pounds of hogs right behind me, because I'm blocking both lanes. And so I just got up, walked to the shoulder, and there were about 20 people there on the side of the road. They were coming towards me to help, to see if I was alive. And when I got up, everybody gasped because they didn't see a lot of blood, just a little bit over here. And the paramedics arrived, and then the highway patrol arrived. Paramedics said, "You want to go to the hospital?" I said, "No, everything seems to be intact." So how fast were you going? I said, "I was doing 70. And he said, "How old are you, Mr. Goodall?" And I said, I was 68. This is 2013. He said, "You should be out in the middle of the road with a sheet over you." I said, "Yeah, I know. I think God looked down and said, I'm going to really screw with you today, but I'm not going to kill you. And I'm just going to wake you up." And boy, it was a wake up call. It was, I look back and I see some of the crashes that the Isle of Man, the TT, the race, motorcycle race, where they crash at 170, 200 miles an hour. I can't imagine that. But they have some pretty nasty crashes, and I can just imagine what it looked like when I left, because the bike started going like this, and it went one way, I went the other. So I lost my confidence in riding. I rode it for another year and a half, and then I gave it to my best friend.
That was quite a gift.
Well, he's he would give me his life if I asked him for it. We've been friends since September 9th, 1962. So he's my oldest, dearest friend.
Not to get too far away from a Japanese Zero before we get back on you not dying on and riding. You don't find it slightly ironic that there's an island by a family named Robinson?
Robinson Crusoe type, huh?
Yeah, I can't get past that right now. That's still stuck in my head. Like, how is there a privately owned island by the Robinsons that you can make this up?
On the island of Kauai, which is the Garden Island, they have the Robinson family owns something like it's over 100,000 acres. Wow. I can't imagine what that's worth. Well, and Disney did a movie called The Descendants. George Clooney was in it, and it was really about the Robinson family, and they wanted to protect the all the land on Kauai and not turn it over to developers and become very wealthy. And it was sort of based on real life Robinson family and fiction. Of course, half of our lives are revolve around fiction.
Yeah. That Japanese Zero ended up in your museum, correct?
Correct.
Which did you restore it or did you leave it in a crumpled mess?
No, just what it looked like as a crashed wreck. Now, what the Pacific Aviation Museum, and now they changed the name of it, and it was silly that they did it. They had 10 years of branding, and they decided to go against everybody's recommendation and change it. So it's the Pearl Harbor Aviation Museum. That's the name of it today. It was the Pacific Aviation Museum Pearl Harbor, but maybe there's just too many words.
I know people are asking about you being sprawled out, flat out on a wreck that you should have died at, and we'll get back to Sturgis, but was there anything that stood out when you were curating in Pearl Harbor at the museum? Was there anything that stood out for anything else, for unique finds or pieces or anything that you saw that no one else has seen?
Well, I mean, it's just the bits and pieces of history that's left over from December 7th.
Yeah.
I mean, on the big tower, it's a water tower, but on the top of the water tower is a air traffic control tower and also a harbor watch. And that had bullet holes in that as well. And it was the place was that particular structure was abandoned back in I think in the late 70s, early 80s. And Hawaii is one of the most corrosive places. That Cape Canaveral and other places. I think Durban, South Africa is almost as bad. I know guys out down at Cocoa Beach next to Patrick Air Force Base and Cape Canaveral. If they go TDY somewhere, temporary duty, if they're gone for more than 6 days, if their car isn't covered up or undercover, they will have a convertible. It rots the fenders. It's not very similar to Minnesota rot. Those of you who don't live around where they use salt on the roads, there's no old cars that have always driven in the winter weather in the state of Minnesota. You'll get old classic cars from somewhere else, but not from Minnesota, unless they were never driven in the winter.
Yeah, and if they were in a barn. But my lamp behind me, by the way, for everyone watching, is a teak lamp from Hawaii because, well, teak holds up.
Yep.
But the corrosion, I would think that anything left in the museum would be pretty unique.
And I acquired about 25 aircraft for the museum during my 4 years, and I got the majority of them from a museum in Warner Robins, Georgia. They had too many. They didn't have it. The budgets were tight, so they were told they had to get rid of a half dozen or more airplanes. And I went down and claimed them. And then you have to move them 6,000 miles, 7,000 miles almost to from Georgia to Hawaii. Very expensive. Very expensive.
Did you move this for the? Is this for the Air Guard, or was it? This is in retirement, right?
Yeah, the airplanes I was moving, they're all museum aircraft. They don't fly. And I'd already retired from the Air Guard.
Which, at this point, had you collected the SR-71 Blackbird for Minnesota yet, or no?
Oh yeah, I did that. For those who haven't seen me before, I say I'm a Blackbird fanatic. I saw my first one in March 10th, 1964 at Edwards Air Force Base. And I had become friends with, at the time, the president of the Lockheed Skunk Works, Ben Rich. And we spoke about airplanes and things that go bump in the night, off and on, about once a quarter for 25 years. And in August of '89, Ben called me at home, and he said, "Jim," says, I got it from the horse's mouth or the horse's butt, one of the two, that the Blackbirds aren't going to make it through Congress. And if anyone can scrounge one, you can. So I started working on it, and immediately I called the Adjutant General from the state of New York, Paul Weaver, and secretary answered the phone and said, "Yes, ma'am, this is Sergeant Goodall with the 133rd. Is the general available?" I said, "Just a minute, I'll put you through." And guard is so much different than active duty. I mean, there's 3 levels of command in the Air Guard, and there's about 30 of them in the active duty forces. So, you can violate the chain of command in the Guard. You don't do it in active duty. But I went directly to a 2-star general, and General Weaver said, "How can I help you, Sarge?" And I said, "How would the New York Air Guard like to move the world's fastest airplane in a couple of your C-5s? That's the Air Force's largest transport." And he was quiet for a few seconds. He said, "You mean the Blackbird?" I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "You call, we'll haul." So to put that into context, when Pratt & Whitney wanted to lease a C-5 from the Air Force, it was $960 some odd thousand a day plus gas. So let's round it off to $1 million a day. And I had 2 C-5s for a total of 8 days each to move the fuselage and then the outer wing panels and engine nacelles. Filled up another C-5. But what I have the distinction of doing, since the bird was mine and the project was my project, is when we're moving the Blackbird from Palmdale to Minnesota, inside a C-5, we first went up to Travis, spent the night, got gas, and then the next morning we headed out. And this is October of '90. But 30 minutes out, the loadmaster is going down below to the cargo area of the C-5. And to give you an idea how big it is, the floor of the C-5 where you can load stuff, it's 121 feet long and 19 feet wide. And the lowest point is about 13 feet high, and that's over the wing box. And I managed to figure out how to cut the wing and engine nacelles off of Blackbird and move it inside, be able to move it inside the C-5 on its own landing gear. And we had 1.5 inches of total clearance on the floorboards when we rolled it in. But on the way from Travis to Minneapolis, I went down with the loadmaster. I climbed up in the landing gear along the chines, got into the cockpit. The seat's all the way down, it's ejection seat. And I have a bucket in there with a cushion. I went in there, closed the canopy. I was in there about 45 minutes, pretending I'm flying the airplane. I mean, this is just, I'm the only person in the world to have done that, to have been in the cockpit of a Blackbird at 33,000 feet at Mach 0.72 inside another airplane.
The one of our watchers right now, Barry, said he knew the doctor that okayed the pilots before they flew the SR-71 Blackbird. He had a book signed with all their signatures in the 90s.
Yeah, I have signatures of most of the guys who flew. I've met all of the test pilots and the CIA pilots, with the exception of the ones that that were, lost a life before, before
Yep.
I met them. But they built 50 Blackbirds total, 15 A-12s, and one behind me is an A-12, 3 interceptor versions called the YF-12, and then 32 SR-71s, of which 3 of them were trainers. And out of those 50 airplanes, they crashed 20 of them. And in January of 67, they lost 3 of them in a 10-day period. Now you're dealing with an airplane that today's cost, if you were to build it, is maybe $5 billion or $4 billion, because it's a one-off. And everything about that airplane is special. The people who worked on it, the equipment that was developed for it, the metallurgy, the composite materials. It's a first-generation stealth airplane. And it's
Entirely titanium.
It's the titanium of the 50 airplanes, the 25 operational SR-71s were built with 100% Soviet Union supplied titanium sponge. They needed hard currency back in the 60s. They thought they were using it for the aft fuselage on a Lockheed F-104 Starfighter, when in fact it was for building that thing behind me. So I'm just blessed to have been at the right place at the right time in history, to have been part of that program. And if you worked on it, if you were one of the guys that worked on the production line, or you were at Area 51 where they're flight testing it, you couldn't talk about it. You couldn't ask questions about it. You couldn't dig to find out stuff on it. Since I wasn't part of that group, I didn't have any NDAs signed, so I could ask all the questions I wanted. A lot of times I was just no comment, get the hell out of here, you're pestering me. But every once in a while I'd get a nugget, and that would lead me to something else. And the funny thing about it, in 1968, when I made my initial inquiries on it, on the Blackbirds, I just wanted some 8x10 color glossies. They weren't classified with stuff I was asking for. And these, and the Department of Defense's standard response was not to cooperate. And because they didn't cooperate, I started digging. And the more I dug, the more I found out. The more I found out, the deeper I dug. And I got to a point when, Ben Rich even said that from a historical point of view, I'm probably one of the most knowledgeable people on the planet. Because if you work in the program, you couldn't ask questions. You couldn't ask the guy next to you that's, working on you're doing a left-handed widget, he's doing a right-handed widget. And if there was no interaction between the two of them, you really shouldn't or couldn't or didn't ask him what he did. And I'm not leaving out women, but back then it was all guys. So
yeah, that's the way it was. The security protocols, I want to jump further. I mean, this is supposed to be a general discussion, but just for those that might still be hanging on you sprawled out on the way to Sturgis on a motorcycle, can you tell everybody what you brushed yourself off? You dusted yourself off. They asked if you had wanted medical treatment. You declined. And did you finish your trip without any further incident, or how did it go?
Yeah. No, they a fully loaded Road King Classic with all my crap on it. We're talking about 1,000 pounds. And the only thing that came off when I laid it down, the load didn't shift at all, but it popped off my windscreen. So we righted the bike, brought it to the shoulder, put the windscreen back on, and said, "Okay, now this is the $64,000 question: will it start?" And I'm 700 miles from home, and AAA won't tow it back to Tucson 700 miles.
I don't think it'd be a cheap bill. Yeah.
So I went there, just hit the starter, half a crank, it started right up. It just tickled the hell out of me. Now the right hand side of the Road King was ground off. The foot peg was ground completely off. The chrome moly engine guard tube around this like roll bar. It was ground through. You could see the inside of it. The bag, my leather bag was all torn up, and it was all cosmetic. But it was about $7,000 worth of damage. And but I was never 100%. I was 98, 97%, but not 100%. And I'm real hard of hearing, so that just added to the anxiety of riding the bike.
Right.
So that happened in 13. I rode it through 2015, and then just parked it. And then my best friend, like I said, I gave it to him, but he doesn't have a pot or a window to pee in or roll it out of. And he really, really wanted a Harley. And he said, "Can I buy it from you?" And I said, "Sure." And then I started thinking he was going to buy it for. And I knew if what he said, he would pay me each month, and he would be good for it. I mean, he'd starve before he would miss a payment. And I thought to myself, no, this is not going to work. If he's paying me what he says he's paying me, he won't have enough money for gas, for maintenance, for anything. So he's just going to park. He's going to look at it and polish it, once a week. So when I got back from Hawaii in 2016, I bought myself a Grand Sport Corvette. At least it had four wheels versus two. And I drove up to Seattle, and I told Rick, I said, "I'm not going to sell you my motorcycle." And his face just dropped. I said, "But I'm going to lease it to you for $1." And he didn't have the money. Yeah, he didn't really have the excess money, for insurance. So I kept the insurance. I paid for it, and it was the right thing to do.
But you did make it there and back. You did not do any. You did not become roadkill at any other point.
Nope. And I rode the entire distance, and I'm very proud of that fact.
Back.
Yep. Yeah.
All right. Well, that wrapped that up, and we did digress for a minute of you curating at the Pearl Harbor Museum.
Yeah.
So just for jumping around for everyone, we will get back to, for anyone wondering, we will have a lot more conversations about Area 51 and a number of other. Part of one of the things that we are going to dovetail and blend for everyone listening is that Jim does have extensive experience with people who have been at Area 51. We all have our UFO and our assorted other ideas as to what's going on in the world. And for those that don't know, my background with Not Aliens, Worse It's Us, my original book, the whole point of my research and conversations are that there's a big section of our ancient megalithic past and our history, including like Hawaii. There are Polynesian megalithic monuments that are in South Pacific, way closer to the Solomon Islands and way past Hawaii, that represent maybe even some of the similar cultures around the world that we see in South America and Egypt and Greece. And even on Easter Island, there are indications of polygonal construction, things that just tend to a total wondering of these modern installations that are experimenting or you're hearing about that have maybe ancient high technology that we are calling alien or we're assuming is from somewhere else. Some of those things we're going to explore. And Jim is a perfect person to talk to because he has firsthand conversations with people from that are, have worked on that base and other, again, the whole Area 51, for those of you chiming in now or just joining us, the idea that there isn't a straight line to our actual human history, and there's not a straight line through which organization secretly wants, one thing or another, whether it's Lockheed or if it's Skunk Works or if it's Phantom and Boeing. There's a lot that we're going to explore. We're going to keep doing that. We're going to do that weekly. So this is that short advertisement break that you will hear us talking a little more in detail next week. But this is a chance for everyone to join in, say hi, and for us to be a little more scattered on this conversation. But thank you again for joining us, all of you.
And I mentioned I have 29 books in print, and I write books on military aircraft, naval ships, and submarines. but I focus on stealth. I wrote the very first book on the F-117 with, at the time, another fellow Minnesotan, Bill Sweetman. The reporter from Wall Street Journal came to Minneapolis in December of '89 to try to find out more on the F-117, the stealth fighter. And he said he had to come from LA to come to Minnesota in December to interview Bill Sweetman, who lived in St. Paul, and me, who lived in Eden Prairie, which is the Minneapolis side of the river. And he says, well, I don't know why in the hell I came here. I said I couldn't get any answers from Lockheed, couldn't get any answers from Air Force or Department of Defense. So he had to come to the land of 10,000 lakes to get an answer to his questions. So I made the front page of the Wall Street Journal three times because of my interest in the Blackbird, my knowledge of Area 51, and that just tickles me.
Well, YOLO X, I have a question. Did Jim know Mr. Burlingame?
Yes.
Burlingame. Well, so he was a dear family friend of my dad's. I also volunteered at the Aviation Museum with him for the summer. So that's from YOLO X.
Okay, yeah. I worked with Burl. He was one of the original guys who started the Pacific Aviation Museum, and it was just at the airport. It was just at H&L there in Honolulu. And they pushed him out after 9/11. People couldn't get in there to see the stuff, and it sort of went into a holding pattern. And then people like Ken DeHoff and a lot of other movers and shakers got involved and felt that they really needed a top-notch aviation museum. And I worked with Ann Murata, who was the director, and she was sharp. She branded that museum, and we were known all over the world. And then, of course, when the pandemic or scandemic hit, that really knocked the wind out of the museum. Just before on 2019, I think their annual visitors was up in the 300,000 range and going up. But with the cessation of anybody going to Hawaii for almost 2 years, it really took a toll on it. But there's a lot of guys still stayed there, that lived there, they retired there, and they were able to keep working on the airplanes and the exhibits. So I'll see them this coming week, and I'm really excited about it because it's been almost 5 years since I've been there. But it was it was a dream job. If I hadn't had so many exes, I would have done it for nothing. But that wasn't the case. But I enjoyed every bit of it, and it was a once in a lifetime opportunity. And I met a lot of incredible people in the process. And one of the funniest guys I've seen him at a couple of functions, but I never sat down and talked with him, is Chuck Yeager. He is the most politically incorrect, funny. Oh my God. And everybody said, you got to watch out for his wife. He says, she's just a really control freak. Well, he turned out to be absolutely delightful. And so he's only going to speak. He's going to speak for 30 minutes and that's it. Well, after about an hour and a half, I turned the microphone off and said, people want to go home. And he was still going, and it was just a hoot. So I had the pleasure of meeting him.
That sounds amazing. The museum, in your opinion, do you have like favorite exhibits? I know you're going back soon, but
yeah,
how do you feel? Maybe not. I'm not saying from a management standpoint, just from a museum highlight standpoint. Does it have anything that stands out that you really, really love? And
yeah. I mean, I enjoyed it all, and I loved it all. But the exhibits that I really, really enjoyed putting together were the Pan Am exhibits. Pan Am and one trip are the reason why I mean, the uniforms today in aviation were created by Juan Tripp. He was the president and CEO of Pan American Airways, and he set up all routes. He set up weather stations. They built the hotels and lodging for the China Clippers all across the Pacific. It was just he was a hell of a guy, but he didn't mentor anybody. And when he retired, he says, "Well, I'm retired. You guys take over." No one knew what his magic was because he didn't have anybody under his wing, that saw how he operated, saw how he did things. And they started to flounder after that. And of all the airlines to go out of business, Pan Am was the one that shouldn't have, just because they were the pathfinders. They were really the first Trans-Pacific and South American airlines. I mean, they were all over the place. And they had, I think the total number of China Clippers, both from Martin, from Sikorsky, and from Boeing, I think it was no more than about 15, maybe 16 total. But that right there was the backbone of Pan Am, and that's what really created the mystique and everything about Pan Am. And we had 700 people 700 former Pan Am employees were at a function in 2012, celebrating, I forget what the anniversary was, but it was just fun. And a lot of them came with the flight attendants. They still had their incredible outfits they wore. And the design, they had the top designers in the world were vying to make uniforms for Pan Am because it was Pan Am.
It's so weird how it all changed. And then, again, us coming from Minnesota, Northwest Airlines and Charles Lindbergh, it's crazy that Terminal 1 is not Charles Lindbergh anymore. It's just, it's so incredible, our yet again, our state history, but the aviation experience for us, we are touching into our grandparents' ages of literally no aviation to space. It's quite spectacular how far we've come.
Oh yeah, and the oldest federally recognized Air National Guard unit is the Minnesota Air Guard.
Yes,
they were federally recognized on the 21st of January, 1921. And they flew an open cockpit Curtiss Oriole. They rented 5 of them from a place in St. Paul down there at Homeland Field. And they flew to Washington, D.C. in an open cockpit airplane in January from Minnesota. I can't imagine anything colder other than maybe skinny dipping in Lake Superior.
Well, that and every single Minnesota hockey player forever.
Yeah.
I could totally see this. If you're not from Minnesota, you wouldn't get it. But can I see anywhere in Canada and any Minnesotan or Wisconsin or North Dakota? Yeah, you hit certain borders up here, and there is a whole group of hardy Americans that will deal with 30 below zero, no sweat.
Yeah.
It's Aaron's Energy 313 question. Then I think her question, by the way, since one of the reasons we're doing these live shows is to answer questions and talk to everyone, and we are not like we're on topic, but Aaron's question is, and mind you, I'm going to remind everyone that I'm about to remind Jim that we are on YouTube. So her question is, has Jim always been skeptical of the narrative? And I'm pretty sure she's referring to, well, the general narrative of the history we're taught / the world as we know it. But I guess that would also cover into Area 51, UFOs, and you name it. But I'll let you answer her question about, are you skeptical of the narrative, knowing that you're on YouTube?
Well, I mean,
at least for now.
We have a big brother that's breathing down the back of our neck, and it's one is the federal government, and it is big tech. I grew up in Silicon Valley, and I've seen where technology has gone. We built 11 crystal growers in our one-car garage in Los Altos, California, back in the 1950s, which was it was for growing silicone crystal for the first time on a commercial basis in North America. And that little company, which was part of Fairchild Camera, ended up, I think it's called, and you probably recognize the name, Intel.
Yeah.
And just watch where the monsters or the giants of Silicon Valley have gone. And then they decided they were gonna control our thought and control what we posted. And I wasn't a fleeing felon, but I was in 2014. Out of 12 months, I was in Facebook jail 7 months and 2 weeks for the calendar year, because they didn't like what I posted, and half the stuff that I got raked over the coals for were forwarding it from someone who already posted it, but it wasn't posted by Jim Goodall, and I guess I was too much of a pain in the butt.
Well, and that's something for everyone out there when you're trying to keep track of different ways, and we could talk a lot of different ways about people get the subtleties. It's like, hey, I said it, somebody else said it, I posted it, but why do something like that with someone like Jim? Well, it's because Jim's Jim. I'm not that we're like, I'm including myself in the group. It's not like we're any different than anyone else, but if you have enough people listening to you, or if they think, whatever. So here we go. It's like somebody ends up in jail because the 1,000, 100,000, 10,000 people who forwarded it aren't a singular hole in the sheet. They're looking to pause on some of this, but that's one layer. One of the things that, and this, I don't think for everyone listening, Jim and I met and we were filming. There's a new documentary Michael and I are producing and directing and making from, Dark Hour. Michael from Dark Hour. We're working on something new. We're gonna have some really great, coverage on exactly these questions, like what is the mysteries that include those secrets. And one of the most important people you could talk to is someone who, of course, knows a lot about Area 51. Hence Jim. So, I mean, we're not getting into the documentary itself, but the reality is there's a lot of strange stuff out there, and there's a lot of strange things that there seems to be some people in digital formats. I think I can say this generally enough for everyone to get it. There are people who are walking hand in hand with other groups to make sure that things are presented, not only new information, but historical information, and whatever the modern version of it was a weather balloon that's being done.
Yeah.
Well, Miss Danielle has spent plenty of time in Facebook jail, so you're getting some sympathies here from our listening and watching crowd.
Right. Right. And the other thing, because I've been doing this for so long, I had the opportunity because of my friendship with John Lear, and he just passed away this last March. And he was one crazy SOB, and I just adored him. We were friends for over 45 years, but because of my friendship with John Lear, I met Bob Lazar. And I met Bob Lazar before he went to work out in the desert.
Do you want to tell people how you met him?
Yeah. In November of 88, the Air Force announced the existence of two classified programs, the B-2 stealth bomber, which I've written books on, and the F-117 stealth fighter, of which I've written books on. So there was only one photograph of the F-117. It was backlit and it was overexposed and it was compressed because they used a telephoto lens out of the back of a KC-135. So you really didn't get the the true look of the airplane. So in early January of '89, I'm in Las Vegas. That's where Lear lived. And he says, I know where the F-179 out of. They're outside of the town of Tonopah, which is sort of halfway between Reno and Vegas. And so it was a Tuesday or Wednesday. We're heading up US 95, heading towards the town of Tonopah. It's a former mining town. And just about 2/3 of the way up there, there's a legal house of ill repute, also known as a whorehouse, called Scotty's Junction. And the reason I mentioned that, they didn't pay all their taxes, and the federal government took it over, and they ran it into the ground. They couldn't make a profit. That defies logic, but it happens. And about 15, 20 miles north of Scotty's Junction, and we're in the desert, and there's not a lot of activity out there as far as houses or subdivisions. An F-117 came flying over about 1,500 feet above us at about 45 degrees across the road, and I almost crashed the car. Because it was like seeing Santa Claus or the Easter Bunny or the Tooth Fairy. You've heard about it, and there it really is. So we got into Tonopah. We had grabbed a quick bite, and then we headed on US 6 eastbound. And about 14, 15 miles out of town is a big white sign with a bomb on top of it. It says Tonopah Test Range. It's run by Sandia. So we get there, we head down the road towards, they call it TTR. And it's 18 miles down to the main gate. And when you get there, I'm retired military, so I can get on almost all bases, but not TTR and not Area 51. So we just went on public lands. We went on along the fence line, and you can see the whole base. And anybody who wants to do it can do that, and there's nothing they can do to stop you. They may stop flying airplanes.
This is with John.
Yeah, I'm with Lear. So I had a Nikon, but it didn't have autofocus in it, but I had a good telephoto lens. And because I wanted it processed and quickly, I normally shot with Kodachrome slide film, but it would take a week to 10 days to get it back. So I'm using Kodacolor 100, a fine grain print film. And we're sitting in this, we're at the fence line. I look to the north, there's a little black fuzzy ball about 15, 18 miles out with a light underneath the bottom, and then a little bluish white dot with a little light in the bottom. So I figured that was a chase plane. So I'm there all ready for the air, for this F-117 to come. And as it's coming, it's filling up the viewfinder, and all of a sudden my body is vibrating. I was like a 10 or 11-year-old boy seeing a naked woman, not a girl, a naked woman for the first time. And my whole body was just, I just knew that everything was going to be. So I'm just shooting away, went through the roll of film, and said, Lear, let's get the heck out of here. Let's head back to Vegas so I can get it processed. There was a thing back in the day called Photomat. They've been taken over by coffee baristas now. But if you had film, you could go drive up, not even get out of your car. They give you an envelope, put your name on it, put your film in it, hand it back, come and pick it up the next day. So I knew we weren't going to get back to Vegas in time to go to the Photomat. So we got west to Warm Springs, and that's the turnoff to the extraterrestrial highway, Nevada 375. We head south on there for about 80 miles and run into the beautiful town of Rachel, Nevada. 88 people called Rachel home at the time. And that's where the little alien is. We got in there, we had a quick bite. I've known Joe and Pat Travis since the first time I went through there was 87. And that's when they bought it. And we had a quick bite, then we headed off back to Vegas. We get there and it's after 9 o'clock and the photomats are closed. And Lear said, I got a new friend of mine. He just moved here from Albuquerque, and he's going to be coming over here in the next 10 or 15 minutes. And shortly after he said that, and a knock at the front door. So Lear goes to answer the door, and guy comes in, and very nice looking guy, very soft spoken, and said he introduced himself as Bob Lazar. So I'm here interviewing for a job out in the desert. I don't know what it is yet, but he said I was with Sandia in Albuquerque, and he's a physicist, and his job was improving the yield on nuclear weapons. They wanted to drop the kill rate down from 12 cents a fatality to 11 cents a fatality. I mean, why a bean counter or somebody would even have that as a directive? I don't know, but he said, yeah, he's a couple more interviews out in the desert, and then he'll have a job out there. So I told him what my dilemma was. I said, I have this shots of the F-117. I'm the first guy, the first civilian to photograph this thing. And so I got to wait till tomorrow to get my film processed. And he said, well, I have a processing unit at home. He lived over in West Charleston, the other side of town from Lear. So let's head on out. So we jump in his car. We're heading out. We're about a block away from Lear's place. And Lazar looks at me. He says, I feel sorry for that dumb SOB Lear. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, he's from this world famous aviation family. I mean, his dad gave the world Learjet and many, many other things associated with aviation. I said, and the dumb fool believes in UFOs. He says, I'm a nuclear physicist. If I can't prove it mathematically or put my hands on it, it doesn't exist. And less than a year later, he's a silhouetted named Jared talking about reverse engineering of alien spacecraft at a place called S4. His star ever changed, and you couldn't put a gun to Lazar's head and convince him that UFOs were real before he went to work out at S4. And his story has never changed. And
I'm getting it's more and more validated.
Oh yeah, every time you turn around. I mean, when Tucker Carlson and I think the New York Times and a government spokesman got on the idiot tube and said that we have craft not made of this earth overflying some of our military installations. And I thought that was just wow. And they're admitting it. So I'm up in Shoalo, Arizona, and I'm talking with a buddy of mine named Doc Skinner. And he's talking to someone on speakerphone. I don't know who he's talking to. And I hear him talking, and he said, yeah, we're looking for some guy who lives. I think he lives in Arizona, but he's supposed to know Lazar. We've been trying to track him down, and we haven't looked that hard, but I'm not sure where to look. And Doc Skinner says, "You mean you're looking for Jim Goodall?" I said, "Yeah, that's the guy's name." I said, "You know where you can find him?" He says, "Yeah, he's about 3 feet from me." So they said, "Would you be willing to call Lazar?" First I said, "Do you know how to get hold of Lazar?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "Would you be willing to call him and ask him what his thoughts were?" And I said, "Absolutely." So I did. I called it. I usually call his wife's number because I know she always answers it. Bob may not. And she said, "Yeah." Joy said, "Well, when are you going to come up and give us a visit?" And I said, "Well, one of these days. I have other obligations, but I do want to get up to your place." So I said, "Is Bob around?" She said, "Yeah, he's in the lab. Let me go get him." So he got, a few seconds later, he's back on. He's on the phone, and he said, "Yeah, I got really excited when I heard it, but then I said, I got to wait. I'm waiting for the other shoe to drop, and I'm not going to get excited until it does." And it really hasn't. The other shoe hasn't dropped yet. So,
do you think do you know what he's implying?
No, he wanted validation, official validation from the federal government that
right.
Yes, we were doing reverse engineering on alien spacecraft.
Yeah,
and
so they're willing to admit that we're actually out there watching them fly around, but we're not willing to admit that
we're dealing with them. Yeah, they're here. Well, then I have a friend of mine. I think she's retired now. Worked at NSA, and the same time that Tucker Carlson is saying, "Hey, we got UFOs flying over military installations, and we can't do anything about it." I sent an email after her, said, "Believe in UFOs," and she got back to me almost instantly, and he said, "Why did you see one?" And I, responded back, "No, I hadn't." He said, "They're here."
There's so much to talk on the subject. We have, filmed a segment for a good documentary for those of you listening. That'll be coming out. We have a general list. We have some ideas. We have a friend of yours that we want to have on here, hopefully when you think they're available for, exactly these stories. I think individuals, the people who are interested in these shows, a lot of them have had personal experiences with UFOs, Michigan UFO sightings. 1 minute, you kind of know they might be out there, and the next minute you have a giant UFO above your head the size of multiple football fields, and then you're like, well, something's going on.
Yeah.
And I don't know what the idea that we're alone. No, we're probably not alone, everyone. However, we do.
I was a docent up at Kitt Peak National Observatories, and that's it's the largest collection of optical telescopes in any one location in the U.S. They have 22 optical telescopes, everything from a 12-inch primary mirror to a 13-foot primary mirror. That's the Mayall 4-meter telescope. And the 2.1 meter, they have 3 2.1 meters, but this particular one was being used by Caltech using remote viewing, remote operation, and adaptive optics. And you shoot a laser beam up at 18 miles, and this is a UV laser. You can't see it, but it can blind satellites and pilots if they happen to fly over it. So they clear with FAA before they put the thing up. And it adjusts the secondary mirror 1,200 times a second to remove atmospheric distortion. And they say the imagery is, in the same class as the Hubble as far as optical clarity. And the air in southern Arizona is pretty much turbulent free compared to most in the rest of the country, and has very few dust particles. So it's very, very clear air. If you go out and look up in the stars, if you can see them, if it's not too bright in your neighborhood, the stars twinkle. That's because of dust and dirt. In southern Arizona, if you're up above 5,000 or 6,000 feet, the stars don't twinkle because the air is so clean. But for 5 years, Caltech went looking in a very, very small part of the Milky Way, that's our galaxy, for exoplanets, planets found outside of our solar system. And over the course of 5 years, they were able to identify and catalog over 8,000 in a very small area. I mean, a postage stamp size area of the Milky Way.
Yeah, just the one area.
Just one little tiny area. And I have rotten knees, and I finally had and it's up at 7,000 feet. I finally had to just quit volunteering up there because my knees were just killing me. I since had knee replacement. But just before I left, we had a gathering down at they called the NOAO, the National Optical Astronomy Observatory's headquarters is at the University of Arizona here in Tucson. And the gathering was for all of the astronomers, all the technicians, and all the docents. And we're going to have a beer and pizza gathering. And the keynote speaker was one of the top astronomers with the National Science Foundation. And he had just returned from a international gathering of all the astronomers looking for exoplanets. It was about a 10-day event. And over the course of the 10 days, using proven mathematical formulas and picking everybody's brain and throwing everything in to the mix to see what they have, they calculate that for every star in the universe, there's a lot. There's 1.5 planets. And out of that incredible number of planets, said there are over 2 billion, that's with a B, 2 billion Earth-like planets orbiting a similar sized brown dwarf star as our sun in the inhabitable zone with liquid water. And to quote Jodie Foster's character in Carl Sagan's movie, The Contact, if we're the only ones, what a waste of space. But we're not alone. I mean, Ben Rich, again, I go back to my friendship with Ben Rich. In 1993, after he retired right after the end of Desert Storm. He wanted to make sure his F-117s worked, and they did. But he was a keynote speaker at a group of graduate aeronautical students from UCLA. They were having a big gathering, and Ben was the keynote speaker. And one of the things he said, we have today, now this is 1993, he said, we have the ability to take ET home. Now think about that statement. This is a man who has built his organization, because he'd been with the Skunk Works since day one, the most incredible airplanes in the shortest period of time from the Skunk Works. I mean, they from signing a contract to first flight on the XP-80 was 108 days from signing a contract to have the thing lift off the ground. And this was being done with minimal people. Same with the U-2. The Blackbird, my favorite airplane in the whole wide world, from signing a contract was 32 months to first flight. Just can't change the paint scheme on a C-130 today in 32 months. And it only been 15 years since Jaeger went Mach 1 in a rocket-powered airplane, and they were developing a manned air-breathing platform like the one behind me that would fly at 90,000 feet at 2,100 miles an hour all day long.
Jim, by the way, what's on that background? What's spilt on the floor?
Underneath?
Yeah.
That's just hydraulic fluid.
Just curious.
Yeah.
Because at this point, we're way not with any. The fuel for the SR-71 is pretty unique. I think it's that's worth explaining. All right. Look, before we digress further, we got to let everybody know that we are going to be doing this next week. Jim is going to Hawaii. We're going to go approximately, we're going to hit 90 minutes here in about 10 minutes. So just so everybody can know, next week, sort of the same time. I guess, Jim, you and I haven't talked dates because I want to get to the fuel, but I did want to let people know that we're going to get into a lot of things over the next few weeks if we're lucky. And I can't believe it, but we've already literally been on for 78 minutes.
Yeah, I know. It's just, I mean, the first time I got on, we're going to be on for half an hour. 2 hours and 20 minutes later, we're still talking. And
Yep. You and I have no problem keeping people entertained, I don't think.
Yeah.
But as far as for everyone listening, notaliens.com, we are looking at possibly producing something like we would stream this also on Rockfin. That would give us a chance to maybe go a direction where we don't have to tie, weight, anchor, super glue, or airplane epoxy Jim's mouth closed.
Yeah.
So I am not, by the way, any less potentially guilty of saying what I want, but there are platforms that are more appropriate for that. And we will make those available. And of course, anything we record directly and place on notaliens.com, that will have a different editing because, it's mine. But for now, since we're broadcasting across,
right. And I've had people. I mean, I've been dealing with classified programs forever. I mean, I'm a pain in the butt to the federal government. I have
yeah.
I had a top secret clearance for 27 years. Never saw anything that got me really excited. I mean, I looked during Desert Storm. My job was to read absolutely every single transmission going to and from CENTCOM, from eyes only to unclassified stuff. And I was always looking for the TR-3B or Lazar sports model being identified, and I didn't see any of that. But we were talking about the fuel.
Yeah. So let's get to the fuel on the SR-71 because we can't.
The fuel used on the SR-71 is a triple distilled kerosene with a fluorocarbon lubricant in it. And you're wondering, why do I need a lubricant in fuel? Because the airplane gets so hot and the engine gets so incredibly hot that they use fuel to operate all the pneumatics in the engine. Everything about the Blackbird is unique, from the lip of the inlet to the fins, about 20, going from minus 70 degrees Fahrenheit. That's the outside temperature at 90,000 feet. And as the air hits the face of the engine, before it goes in the engine, it's gone from, there's been a 900 degree rise in temperature in 20 feet. And as the air goes into the first stage, by the time it hits the fourth stage, it's at 1,200 degrees. And the afterburner section's at 3,400 degrees Fahrenheit. These are things that will melt everything, but not the Blackbird. So they had to have a special fuel, the one that wouldn't coke at high temperatures. That's just deposits. They were going to use boron supplements in there to reduce the contrail, or people say the vapor trails or chemtrails, which they're not. And but the fuel is very special, and they had to develop an igniting system that would light it, because if you take water being 0, gasoline being 100, and the New York Fire Department fire codes, the rating for JP7, which is the fuel used on the Blackbird, it's a little bit more flammable than water. You have to have it. You have to use a chemical ignition system, and they use TEB, which is triethylene boron, and it's a pyrophoric chemical, and it lights on contact with air, and it burns very, very bright, very, very hot. But the fuel is very, very special. They don't have fuel tanks or bladders like most airplanes do, because they can't survive from 70 below 0 to some parts of the airframe are 500 to 1,000 degrees, depending on where you're at on the airframe. And you also have a problem with expansion at high temperatures. There's been a lot of speculation that the Blackbird grows a foot. No, it grows 2 inches, 1.97 inches, or 1.92 inches, excuse me. It's on standard day after 22 minutes at Mach 3. But the thing about the fuel, it's non-flammable. And when the first SR-71 went on public display at Andrews Air Force Base in Washington, D.C., the fuels guy, he's sitting on the fuel cart. He sees the fire inspector walking down the flight line. So he pulls out a cigarette and lights a cigarette. He's sitting on a fuel cart. The fire marshal says, "Put that cigarette out." He gets it and he flicks it into a pan of fuel underneath the airplane. They have these big, huge pans about an inch high, and they're just filled with fuel. Put it in, and the guy hit the ground and covered his head. Nothing happened. And the guys, the fuels guys, just laughing. He said, "You can't catch that stuff on fire." Well, he went from being an E8 to an E4 when he got back to Beale, and they gave him his stripes back about a month later. But it's everything about that airplane is special. There isn't anything that's off the shelf.
Yeah,
Everything.
for those that didn't quite catch it, I think it's so brilliant and weird and amazing that the hydraulics of this entire plane, it's being run by fuel, not by a separate. It's fuel.
That's the engine part. Yeah, the engine part and the fuel. Now the other thing is how does the pilot survive? Well, he's in a David Clark spacesuit. Shuttle astronauts use the same type of suit. This is after Challenger. So they have a suit, but the airplane, the coolest part of the airplane is the windscreen, the windshield up front. It's at about 400 degrees Fahrenheit. The leading edge of the inlets and areas around the engine nacelle can be up to 1,000 degrees. The exhaust ejector, 3,200 degrees. So they have to cool down the cockpit and the camera bay behind. And how you do it? So it takes 1,200 degree bleed air off of stage 4 off the engine. It runs them through 3 heat exchangers. I'm not exactly how they work, but they use the fuel partly as a heat sink. And when the air comes into the cockpit, the air is at 30 degrees. And they blow it on either side. Now he's in a suit, and he's totally protected from the environment. And that suit is good for 120,000 feet. It's just but everything about that airplane is had to be developed from scratch. Kelly Johnson, when they first started working on the Blackbird, designing it, said if any from the janitor to his right-hand man, Ben Rich, if you can show me how I can take a pound of weight out of the airplane, I'll give you $100. Now, this is back in the 1950s. $100 bill back then, you could buy a car. I did.
Yeah, it was a lot of money. And in all that time, did anyone ever lighten the thing up?
No. No. When Kelly Johnson retired from the Skunk Works, he still had the $100 bill that he had offered. So I'm sure there was some incentives, and I'm sure people took stuff out. But Kelly said that he still had the $100 bill left over.
They couldn't lighten it, make it any different. I mean, the engineering. For those of you out there that enjoy Jim's background and this knowledge base, we are going to talk a lot more about the SR. Not only the Skunk Works and the Blackbird and the A-12, and there's so many just fun aerospace and engineering that I think we're also going to have some fun with talking about our ancient past, ancient modern secrets, what's flying around in those skies, what we're labeling UFOs or not, and how some of all this technology passes around and it gets passed off as military technology or otherwise. There's a lot of places we're going to go over the next few weeks, but that's just a sampling, and I can't believe it. I mean, in short, we just got going, really wanted to have a casual conversation, and we've officially, Jim, spent 88 minutes. And I feel like we aren't really talking yet.
No. We're just laying a foundation.
Yeah. And I know that some people were already thanking us. I want to thank everyone for joining us. And I know, you and I haven't really settled on, suppose we shouldn't really throw a date out yet for everyone, but it will be next week. You will see the countdown probably on YouTube. But we might end up doing Rockfin. So we'll just look for it there. Either way, I might do a broadcast that will tell you where to go to watch the show next week on YouTube, or you'll find that info out on notaliens.com. Until then, Jim, any final words or any books or conferences or things you want to talk about quick that you're doing?
No, I just I have 29 books in print. My 28th book was 75 years of the Lockheed Skunk Works. So I cover everything they built over the last 75, 80 years that I know of. Jeez. And of the 43 programs, there's probably 40 that are still classified. But the guys at the Skunk Works love the book. There isn't anything that I will keep from anybody. If I have an answer to a question, I'll tell you.
I've asked Jim that for all those listening. I've asked him multiple times. He has followed through on this.
And because it doesn't do me any good to have it up here and not share it. Because if I drop over dead 10 minutes from now and I had something that was earth shattering, I mean, I have a picture of E.T. and me out by the pool.
You're going to have it on the internet before anyone else does.
Yep. That's my intent. That's my intent. So next week, I'm going to be with the week after next. I'm going to be on the Big Island with Michael Schratt. He's one of my dearest friends, and I'm going to have him join us as well if he has time. He has all sorts of fun things are happening with and for Michael, and I couldn't be happier for him. So
yeah, well. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Jim, thanks for joining us.
My pleasure.
We are going to let everyone move on to whatever the next show or event is on a Friday night, and we will talk to you guys next week. I'm going to throw you in the back room for a minute. We'll end this broadcast.
All right. Sounds good.
All right. Thanks again, everyone, for joining us. This will be a weekly occurrence. We will be, Jim and I will be entertaining other guests, including Michael, you just heard him talking about. Love field researchers, love people out in the field doing their thing. And it's near and dear to me also, because if we don't get out, all of us independently or even irrelevant to what we think of the narratives out there, it's good to go out and get your feet wet and answer your own questions and do your own exploring. And it doesn't matter how extensive or how simple or what you have time for. And reading counts. Digital exploration is fair game, and so is a million other formats. So thank you again, and good night.